Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and this is part two. I very, very rarely do a two-parter, but I really enjoyed the conversation last time with my guest, and so I twisted his arm and got him to agree to stick around for a second episode, and we really didn't get into the second half of his journey, so I'm glad that we were able to do that. His name is Charles Bender. He's the CEO of Attentus Technologies. He also, for those of you who've listened to this show, you know that I am active in Entrepreneurs Organization, and he is the regional chair for the U.S. West of Entrepreneurs Organization, which is kind of like El Jefe. He's the big boss for the Western United States, a lot of different chapters. Everyone salutes to him when he comes into the room. That's kind of how it works. And so we're going to talk a little bit about his involvement in that wonderful organization. And of course, if you haven't listened to the show before, go check out our archives. Lots of great episodes in there. Lots of EO members from Vern Harnish to Warren Rustand and lots of different guests like that you can go check out. And this episode, of course, brought to you by Rise25, my company, which helps B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can visit our website at rise25.com to learn more about it. All right, Charles, last time we heard some great stories about growing up in Prescott, Arizona, shining shoes and making money, and what a poor kid learned about making money from a young age. One of the key pivot points that we didn't get to that I was super curious about is how someone's in the dating space and then gets into IT services, because that does not seem like a logical linear path at all. But maybe it makes sense in retrospect. So how did you go from there to there?
I will start. So it's not directly from dating to IT services. So what happened is I moved to the country. I moved out in the farm world in 2002, and I had built this CRM system to run my dating service franchises, and it was dashboarding and all this stuff. It was pretty early in that stuff. But I needed internet in order for it to work, and there was no high-speed internet available at my house. And when I
dial-up, we're talking dial-up days.
Dial-up days, right?
Wow.
There was broadband in the cities, but not yet in the country, right? And I was used to downloading on Napster, man. I was like, that was like killing me. But what really happened was I got out here, and when I was searching for the house, there was nothing that was the normal traditional. There's no cable, there's no DSL, there was none of those types of things that were available. And a couple guys had started this wireless ISP, and they told me before I bought the house that, oh yeah, we can get you high-speed internet. So I bought the house, moved in, went to order my high-speed internet, and suddenly they couldn't, right? So I was like, really? I just probably made my biggest single investment in a property ever, because it's a couple acres, nice house and stuff. And it functionally means I still have to go to an office. That's not going to work for me. So what I ended up doing is I ended up going and putting in what was called a T1, which is a 1.5 megabit by 1.5 megabit line for internet over copper. It used to be really common back in the old days, and it was super expensive. It was like $900 or $1,000 a month, right? And I remember thinking to myself, man, I need it badly. I can afford it, but man, I'm cheap. I don't like to pay $900 a month. So my neighbors had come over, and these guys had this wireless business. They were like, listen, we might be able to help offset the cost of the $900 if you let us put an antenna on your house. And so I brought my neighbors over and showed them what high-speed internet was like. And they were like, oh, I have to have some of that. So I was like, okay, well, I've got 8 neighbors off my house. 900 divided by 8, maybe I can get my whole T1 paid for by the neighbors, really. Yeah. Where it started. Yeah. So we did that, and it was really early days of wireless technology. And frankly, what happened was these two guys didn't have any money. They had an idea, they had some skills, One of them was super bright. Actually, he's a principal at Microsoft today. Super bright guy. His younger brother is my business partner in my IT business today. But he initially was my partner when I bought into the broadband business. Now I bought into it because I had money and lots of hubris, right? I frankly thought, because I had a successful business, that I understood business. And I was young and thought I was invincible. So
it was an existing business that was providing broadband in the countryside. Is that what it did?
Kinda. It was, when I say existing business, they had 14 customers.
Okay.
So it wasn't a business.
Okay.
It was like a hobby that they were trying to turn into a business. And neither one of them really had the funding. They didn't know how to build a business model. They didn't know what it would cost to actually make it a profitable venture.
This is like your Berkshire Hathaway story. You're Warren Buffett in Berkshire Hathaway. I don't know if you know the original origin story of that, but it was like a defunct textile mill or something like that. And that's where the origin of the name came from. And then, of course, made it into what it is today.
Yeah. I if you can put me in the same sentence with Warren Buffett, and I will take it. Right. But in all honesty, I had no clue what the hell I was doing. And so I bought them. I paid off a credit line that they had from another investor. In exchange for that, I took 50% of the business at the time. And then I had a deal for, if I put more money into it, that they would either pay it back or my equity would increase.
Question: why did you go into this deal? It didn't sound like they were all that impressive. They didn't have much of a business. If you wanted to start a business, why didn't you just start one on your own? Or was it you saw something in them? Why did you go in with them? I'm
going to tell you. Hubris. I would say. So the one guy who had the business plan, the guy that works for Microsoft, his name's Gabe Frost. He's absolutely brilliant. He's a brilliant human being. And I saw a young guy, really brilliant. Like, he was in his early 20s, just out of college, super fired up. The other guy was also super brilliant, but he was one of those guys that is really smart in theory, but not really practical in reality, right? So didn't follow through with things, and ultimately we dissolved that company to take it over, and then I've just owned it solely since, right? But what had happened was I had a technology background from the military. So in the Navy, I worked on radar systems and guidance systems for targeting for the weapon systems on board ships, right? So I had a somewhat familiarity with how electronics worked. I knew how frequencies worked. I knew how radar worked, and wireless technologies, ironically, pretty similar, right? You have a dish aimed at a direction, and then you get a feedback, but it's on radio waves, so you can add packets to it and some other information. So I thought that I knew what I was doing, but I quickly learned I hadn't a clue what I was doing. And the really smart guy, Gabe, took a job at Microsoft, left the business, and then I was left with his partner, who frankly was terrible. He had some problems, and some issues and challenges to overcome, and I won't air those here. But ultimately, that didn't work. But what I realized is what he was telling me during the day and what I was Googling at night didn't match up. So I ended up going to school full time, basically at night on my own, to become a network engineer, to understand what the hell this thing does, so I could actually grow the business and be able to not get lied to, basically. When it comes down to, I was
when it came to the technology, he was telling you certain things about the technology. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, he was telling me about the technology, telling me problems that couldn't be overcome, and I'm like, these aren't problems that can't be overcome with just a little scratch at it revealed that. So once that parted, we blew the business up. We grew really quickly, but because we're rural, if you do anything with computers or anything with technology, everybody calls you with their technology questions.
Yeah.
And so from 2003, I would say, until 2005, we added $1 million a year in revenue and IT services work. That was just just saying yes, right? When you're starting up, you just say yes to pay the bills, right?
So helping businesses.
Yeah, just helping businesses, helping whatever.
Yeah.
And then I looked at it one day and I was like, oh my gosh, I actually have a business here. That's an actual real business, separate and apart from the internet business, that I should probably treat with the respect that I would a real business. Right.
And at the same time, you're running the dating business as well.
Yeah. So at the same time, so the irony there is in 2002, 2003, we were growing like crazy. And then I realized that I didn't know anything about business. So the thing about the dating service business is it was really a sales and marketing business. And there was really no recurring revenue. So, so let's put it to you this way: if you own a dating business where you match people up, and you're extremely successful, right? How many of them pay you again?
None, right?
None,
yeah,
right.
And let's say that they don't need you anymore,
right? And if you're not successful, how many want to pay you again?
None, right?
You see the problem?
It didn't work. Yeah.
So we were spending, I would say, between 3 and 4 million a year on direct mail. So every one of our markets, we saturated with direct mail, every household, every 6 weeks. And we were making about a net profit of 25% on 0.2% of return on our mail. Right. Okay. So if we got 0.2% of return, so we'd send out a mailer, someone would fill out a form talking about what they're looking for. They would send it back to us. We would call them, set an appointment, have them come into our office. We'd sit down, explain what we did. They would buy it, and then we would start matching them. That was our model, right? Well, in 2003, late 2002, 2003, they passed a law at Congress called the Do Not Call list, right? And that Do Not Call telemarketing list, at the time, if you recall, every evening you would get hit up by telemarketer after telemarketer after telemarketer, right? Now, we were using direct mail, so we weren't those people, but everybody that was doing that shifted to direct mail as soon as the law went into place. So instead of being one of maybe 3 pieces of advertising in the mail that you'd get over the course of a week, we became one of 30 people would get a day.
So the success rate went down a lot.
Oh yeah, it went from 0.2 to maybe 0.1%. It just cratered, and we were unable to solve that problem. I wish I could give you some grand exit story and how I made all this money exiting. Really, the point, what I ended up doing was pivoting to the internet business because I already had it. It had potential, and I had a limited window of cash flow coming out of the other business, and a lot of assets I had accumulated that I could pull and dump into growing that business. So I remember,
when you refer to those assets, what were the assets that you pulled from the dating business into the IT services business?
Well, I mean, it wasn't necessarily assets that were in the business. It was assets that I had accumulated over the years in that business. So I had accumulated a fair amount of money. I had properties and stuff and some different things. So I ended up selling a bunch of that stuff to dump them into the infrastructure. Thing about an ISP is it's expensive to start. Right. Once you hit critical mass, it's really nice because every month you wake up with money in the bank. Right. You sell them once and they pay you forever, as long as you're continuing to provide and improve and keep up with services, which was very different than the dating business, obviously.
Well, the dating business, ironically, it was like my legal practice when I was a practicing attorney, because every month, I would say that every month you wake up the first day of the month and you're starting over at zero.
Exactly. It's very similar. Like, and how do you build recurring revenue into that model? Right.
Yeah.
So the things I learned in the dating business was always have recurring revenue. The smart thing I did was, and it's smart because of an EO member, really. I had a great forum mate who pointed out this problem. He said, you have no recurring revenue. If something bad happens, you're in trouble. So we started a maintenance fee of like $3 a month. It was just a really nominal amount, but it ended up being like $250,000 a month in revenue based across the organization that allowed us to actually try a number of things along the way to see if we could solve the problem, but also gave me a runway. Right. So we could end all of our agreements with integrity. That was really important to me. We made a commitment. We were going to introduce X number of people to every member. At some point, we stopped adding new members, or when we only added them for a limited period of times, so we could continue to match our existing members. And then complete their contracts with integrity as opposed to just closing the doors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
most of that recurring revenue allowed us to continue to just do that for about a 2-year window. So from 2003 to 2005, when we finally shut the business down, that's what I had turned my attention completely to growing the internet business.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where that came from. So,
Yeah.
but
So that
yeah,
was
really,
and that I'm sure was what attracted to you. One of the things that attracted you to the IT services business is that, oh, wow, I could finally have a business that generates recurring revenue that doesn't have all the built-in structural limitations that the dating business did.
yeah, and it certainly doesn't rely on chemistry between two human beings to have success, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
we could control the outcomes, which was the other thing was really nice.
It's
So
fascinating to me how entrepreneurs who started more than one business, the next one is almost always a direct result or a response to the limitations and challenges they had in the previous one.
yeah,
You know, you seek out something that's like, okay, I can't stand this, the fact that it was dealt on the, I couldn't control the chemistry between two people. I'm going to go into some business that has nothing to do with something arbitrary like that. You see that a lot of times.
yeah. I mean, I think that's just because we learn, right? We learn as we go. So, once we pivoted and created the IT business as its own business, we hit the Inc. 5000 list. We continued to grow that business. The ISP was growing next to it. And then the hardest part of my life, actually, the last 10 years has been riding the two skateboards, right? And just imagine hopping on two skateboards and on a wobbly road, and you end up playing whack-a-mole a lot with your business. But fortunately, I've been really blessed. I've got great team members on both sides. They run all the operations mostly. So I get to focus on strategy. But that was how I got to IT services from dating, was because I moved out into the country, couldn't get internet myself, saw an opportunity, made an investment, recognized that the investment was going to get all lost if I didn't take it over.
Yeah.
Went to school, learned it, and here we are.
So at what point,
later.
So which was the original business? Was it Skynet Broadband or was it Attentus Technologies?
Skynet Broadband was the original business.
And at what point did you have two different brands? Was that
that was Biz IT Pros. So if you look at my LinkedIn, you'll see Biz IT Pros for a period of time, starting probably in like 2007, 2008, 2000. That we created that brand to do the IT business. In 2017, May of 2017, I had made a decision that what I needed to do is I needed somebody who just loved IT, and was in operations, like just really knew operations inside and out. I'm more visionary. I am terrible at operations. I mean, terrible compared to many. I'm good enough, but it's not where my core competency lies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I mentioned that Gabe Frost was a business partner. He's a dear friend, great guy. His younger brother had owned a managed services kind of at the same time since we started, and had his business running for 15 years or 16 years at the time. And but he was struggling with breaking free of being kind of a lone operator, because he just didn't think in terms of scale the way I thought in terms of scale. So in 2017, we partnered and became Attentus, but both of our businesses stretched back to like 2002, 2001, 2002. That's where we come up with the length of time.
Now, let me ask you about that. What you very complimentary of him. What was it that you knew that merging these two businesses would, 1 + 1 would equal 3?
Attention. Right. So, we had a great business and great team members, and I still have our employee number 1 from Skynet, and employee number 2 from employee number 3 and I have employees that have been with me for 18, 19, 16, 15 years now. But what they're really good at is doing, but they're not really good at operational thinking. Like, just how do I build better processes? How do I document? Dustin, my business partner, is literally the best person I've ever seen in my life at that stuff. Like he is smart. He's focused on the details. He's almost OCD about it, making sure that we keep our promises. And I saw that as an opportunity, and he's quite a bit younger, so he's got a lot. He's about 15 years younger than I am, and he's got a lot of passion for just delivering at a very, very high level. And I felt like I needed some of that. I needed some accountability personally, and I needed somebody who was just going to push me, right?
Yeah.
And that's been great.
Let's switch to talking about your concept of generational poverty. That's one thing you're really passionate about, is ending generational poverty. Let's start with, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, most people who grow up in an environment like my own, or the one I grew up, are growing up because their parents didn't break free of it. Their grandparents didn't break free of it. Their great grandparents didn't break free of it, of poverty as a standard, and they just don't have they're not raised with what's possible. They're often raised with the parent justifying what's not possible based on their own experience
and focusing on limitations, focusing on what's holding them back.
Precisely. And I certainly had that. I remember the college conversation with my father, where every time I brought it up, I mean, I was a straight A student, right? I never had trouble in high school or middle school or anything. I mean, it's always in the top of the class, not the top, but somewhere near the top. And when I talk about college, all my dad would talk about was how hard it would be, how expensive it was, how problem.
Had he gone to college?
He had not, no. His highest level of education, I think, might have been 8th or 9th grade. You know, his father died when he was 13, and he ended up having to go to work to help support his sisters and his mom, right? So, and so that, you know, I think that there was a what I saw in my own family and what I see in a lot of other families is just a lot of justification for why things didn't work out. There's always somebody to blame. There's always some boogeyman, you know, either the government or this thing or that thing or the other thing. And what the difference between the people I know who broke that mold and the ones who didn't is they just didn't accept the excuses. They took personal responsibility to deal with the hand that they're dealt, and play that hand the best they can, and then always look for the next hand, right? You know, and so for me, what I wanted to change for my family was I didn't want my kids to be raised with that mindset. I wanted my kids to see money as a tool, you know, not the most important thing, but as something that you can definitely attain. And here's the way to do it. Like, here's the path to having some success. That, like, my father really tried. He tried to tell me the things that he thought would help. I remember he owned a shoe repair store. He was a partner in a shoe repair store. Terrible businessman. Couldn't do math. Really, I mean, terrible. But it was a trade, and he wanted me to have a trade that I could fall back on if all else failed, right?
It's a common thing amongst trades parents who are in the trades.
Yeah. And so I appreciate that was something he was looking out for and trying to do, but it was also it was limited based on his own experience, right? So for me, I see that all over the world. I see it in families that struggle, you know, and there's often other issues. There's oftentimes alcoholism and some other psychological health problems and whatever that contribute to this kind of stuff. But ultimately, what I wanted to do is make sure that I provided a stable environment for my family, where my wallet didn't make the decisions, our values made the decisions. And I wanted to be able to teach my kids what's possible. Like, you know, go out and do what you want, but make sure that what you want provides you the life you want to live.
I want to ask you, before we get into how you taught your kids, if you didn't learn this from your parents, where did you learn it?
Great question.
Did you teach yourself? Was it books? Was it speakers? Where did you learn it?
So I was in Seattle. They have this thing, or used to have this thing called the Street of Dreams, right? And these are these really nice houses that the builders build, and then they open up this neighborhood, and you can pay a ticket fee, and you can walk through these houses and see all these unattainable things, right? That was how I viewed it when I was in the military. And I remember walking through the houses and looking around, and just, it's so funny when I think about it now, because these houses sold for maybe $600,000 or $700,000 at the time, right? This is in the 80s, so that was a lot of money then.
Sure,
but
yeah.
even then, you could double it roughly, and that's about what we would pay for a house today, right?
Yeah.
But at the time, it was like, who could possibly, like, I remember asking myself, who could possibly afford a $3,000 a month mortgage or a $5,000 a month mortgage? Who makes that much money? That was the lens I was operating from within, right? So what I used to do was, after the houses that all sell, I would go back and just drive into the neighborhoods. And if somebody was out mowing their lawn, I would literally get out of my car and just ask them what they did. Because I didn't know.
You just walk up to them?
I would just walk up to them, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, listen, I toured your house when it was on the Street of Dreams, and I've always been curious, what do you do? Who can afford this kind of thing?
Yeah.
And they would tell me, right? And then they'd tell me whether I was a doctor or a lawyer or a sales guy or a business guy, right? That was kind of where it was. There weren't very many scientists,
Yeah.
There were some software engineers, but most of them were business guys or sales guys. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to go back to college to be a doctor.
Well, if they were software engineers in the mid 80s in Seattle, I'd love to see where they are now.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're on Lake Washington, and they have, like, there's one guy named Bill Gates that kind of people know about, but
mowing his own lawn.
Yeah. Back then,
maybe
probably,
he might have
actually, he wouldn't have been surprised. Yeah. So I learned a lot of them were in sales, a lot of them were in financial sales, and this is when I was still in the Navy. So I applied for a job when I was getting out of the Navy to work for a company called First Investors, and it was one of those jobs. It was a financial planning. It was a registered representative is what the position was, but it was a management training program. Now, I didn't know anything about finance. I didn't know anything about anything. But I went to the interview, and I remember sitting in the interview, and there was like 30 other people in there, all young people like I was. I was 20, 21. The guy says to everybody, he says, listen, his name is Bill Gribble. This guy was like an amazing mentor for me early in that career, like just showing me like how to be successful. But he's telling everybody the average money that a first-year representative makes, registered representative makes, is like $25,000 a year. The next year, it's probably double that, maybe $70,000 a year. But as you get your client base built, that money goes up, and your workload becomes a lot more manageable. And I remember going home and talking to my then wife. It was my first wife, my Navy enlisted guy who gets married when they first go in the Navy marriage. First wife made a lot of mistakes, I'll tell you. That this job was like, they say the average is $25,000 a year. I'm at least average. And it's $10,000 more than I'm making in the Navy right now. So I should take the chance. I really had nothing to lose. Right. So her parents lent me the money to go pay for my license, my background check, the testing, so I could get, and it was like $400 or $500 at the time, which was a considerable amount of money for me. And I started as a registered representative, right? And I just remember, I remember what was funny about that is all they had to do was just tell me what to do. Like I was that eager kid who. I actually look for it in employees today. I call it a PSD degree. Or, did they grow up poor? Are they smart? And are they deeply determined to change that? If they have those three elements, I can mold them into anything. I can literally create magic for them, their lives, and their families, right? It's the determination and a little bit of smart, right? But I just copied the hell out of them. They would tell me what to do, and I just did it. Right. No questions. And I was really successful at it. I was rookie of the year my first year, and so on and so forth. So the way I learned was I found out that people in finance made money. I took a chance at this that was 100% commission. I was terrified at 100% commission.
I mean, especially coming out of the military where you're not doing anything like that. And you're close to sales. Yeah. I mean, you'd done sales at a younger age when you were, 11, 12 years old, hustling. Yeah. Doing shoe shines and stuff like that.
Yeah, I never really had a fear of rejection. So that was something I didn't have to overcome. I mean, honestly, I just looked at it like, what's the worst they can do is say no. In fact, I innovated around it. What I did is I turned no's into yeses. And I don't know if I talked about this last time we were on the call, but I created these sheets of paper that had blocks of $25 signs on them. And then I did the math based on how many dollar signs I needed to cross off to get an appointment, how many appointments I had to see in order to get a sale, how much money I made per sale. And then I divided my total contacts by the money I made on a sale and came up with how much a no was worth.
Yeah. So you're dialing for dollars at this point.
Just dialing for dollars, dialing to set appointments. And so, but in that business, I got to be around people who were successful, who were making money, who learned some different things and had some bigger dreams. And what I found for the generational poverty piece, what changed for me was dreaming bigger. Like, just dreaming bigger. I remember at one point in the Navy, I had a girlfriend that I looked at, talking about when I get out of the Navy, I'm going to go to work for the government. I'm going to make $35,000 a year, and man, we'll be set for life. That I remember that conversation clear as day.
So that was obviously before you got to the period we're talking about now. Yeah,
exactly. It was early in it was like I'd been in the Navy a year, right?
Yeah.
So, it was just, mindset matters.
Yeah. So, all right. So after this experience, let's go flash forward to your kids are hitting middle school, and you did something really interesting that I've never heard someone say before. It's really especially interesting to me because I'm at one of the EO Alchemy conference. One of the speakers there was talking about this family economy idea as an alternative to doing allowance for your kids, and I implemented it with my kids. I rebranded it the Family Wealth Savings Project because I thought that was a little bit more sexy than family economy. But general idea. And you did something where you, with your kids, when they hit middle school, you added up everything that you would have to pay for them: shoes, band, soccer, instrument rental, friends' birthday parties. And you said, let's build a budget. They're like 13 years old and they had the responsibility to manage their money. So talk about that.
Well, so one of the things I realized is, so as a parent, my job has always been to try and move the boundaries just out of their sight line, right? If I can just get it just slightly out of their sight line where they feel like they have some agency and some freedom and some responsibility and some accountability for their choices, that's what it means to be an adult, right? So I wanted to raise competent adults. That's always been my main goal. If they love me, great. If they respect me, great. But competent adults, it feels like, is my job as a parent, right? Of course I want them to love me and I love them to death and all of those types of things. But, being clear about that. The first part of that, though, really comes down to money and having a grasp of the consequences of having a limited amount of money and what you choose to spend it on and what you have to give up in order to do so. But if they always thought of me as the ATM machine, that was a limitless dollar, then they're not going to learn how to deal with constraint, right? So that's where the idea came from. It was literally, hey, rather than I think you're old enough to be able to manage money the way you see fit, right? And I want to treat you like an adult, and I'm going to give you some opportunities where you can make some additional money. But there are certain things that, listen, I'm going to pay for anyway. I'm going to pay for your books. I'm going to pay for your birthday gifts. I'm going to pay for your clothes. I'm going to pay for whatever. Let's just add it all up. Let's figure out what that budget's going to be. And I had them take a first run at it by themselves, because I thought that was an important process to go through. And then I came back and they brought me their first draft, and I would ask them, okay, so what did you think about this? Did you think about that? How long do clothes last? What happens if you have 4 friends that have birthday parties instead of 1? Let's talk this through. And then their second draft, I just accepted regardless of what they put forward. Right. Because I wanted to teach them how to negotiate as well. Right.
So you still felt it was under. It sounds like
it was definitely under.
Okay.
Yeah, it was definitely under.
And you were hoping that they're going to run out of money and they're going to need to figure out their way out of that.
I was hoping that they would recognize that they needed to be more thoughtful about how they structured these things. Think of it as just, it's a learning exercise, right? So as they got through the year, they would spend their money on video games, on Steam, and then they would run out of money for lunch at school. I'm like, well, there's always money and there's always stuff in the refrigerator. pack a bag. I'm not giving you more lunch money. Your next payday is 2 weeks from now.
So you'd have regular paydays that they had to work towards. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I opened a checking account with them, and then I would just literally transfer $500 a month into the checking account, and it ran out when it ran out.
Yeah.
And then, their fallback was what was in the refrigerator.
And were they doing chores to earn this money?
Nope. This was just the stuff I would normally do.
Just to manage.
Right? Yeah. Now we have expectations in our house that if you live in our house, you contribute to solving the house. And then there's extra work, right? So the extra work was stuff like, hey, my cars need washed. We have 2.5 acres. Mowing the lawn is not trivial.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So, that would be an extra thing. I'd pay them for a couple hours for that. I'd pay, so there were other bigger things that they could do that could earn them money. But for the most part, what I really wanted to be this to be about the things that any parent would just pay for. Right. Yeah. And then turn that money over to them. So, to me, like dishes and cleaning up after yourself, and that's just, you live in a house with other human beings, you're contributing. That's not a pay for process. That was just my attitude around it.
Yeah. And so all the way through high school, your kids
all the way through high school. So every year they'd come back and renegotiate, right? They'd come back and they wanted a new cell phone. And I'm like, well, where's that fit into your budget? I didn't see where that one worked. The when they started driving, it was like gas. So both of my kids went to high school we took them out of district, and the school was about 40 minutes away from where we live. So my wife and I, either one of us, mostly my wife, would drive them back and forth to school until they got their driver's license. The day they got their driver's license was like, oh, we picked up, 3 hours a day in our life by not having to do that. So we were fine with the car, providing the car and providing insurance, but gas was the big thing that we made sure they had in their budget, right?
Yeah.
And then we had them figure it out, like, what's your car's gas mileage, and what is each day back and forth to school? What does that cost to get you there for transportation? Now, if you're got band and you have to go back, you're staying later, you got a sports thing, or you're going to go to a game or whatever, let's calculate those, because that's 2 trips that day. So I had them really just do basic math, right?
Yeah.
Think it through.
So you now have a 25-year-old and 21-year-old.
Yep.
And what are they like with managing money now after having gone through this experience?
So it's really fascinating. So my oldest is probably one of the more frugal people you ever know. He just doesn't spend money.
Do you think he would have been that way if you'd done this exercise with him from 7th grade on? Or
it's hard to say, but he definitely learned how to decide what's important to spend money on and what's not important to spend money on for him, like for the life he wants to have. And then my youngest is one of those that he's still in college, so we're still helping him out. But it's kind of the same thing. What is the basics that you have to have in order to be in college? We're going to pay for the roof over your head and a housing plan for food. But if you want to go to the frat party and you want to be the wealthy guy on campus, well, you got to go drive DoorDash or something during the day, right? Find a couple hours a week where you're going to go do that. So it's interesting because he doesn't ask me for money very often, but he will ask my wife, and it shows up in a text, and it starts with an M, and he goes, oh, M. And my wife's like, what does he want now? But they're both understand money, and they're both pretty good with it. I'd say. I think the difference between my oldest and my youngest is my oldest learned how to live within something, and my youngest figures out how to expand to whatever he wants, right? And he's definitely more the entrepreneurial one of the two.
Let me ask you this about parenting, because this came up in a EO dads group that I'm in, where someone was talking about, they like some nice things. They've done well. They like, as a family, to go on nice trips or vacations or have little spurges from time to time. How do you manage that and not have the kids take that for granted and actually appreciate it?
I think it's a high bar expecting them to have a feeling about something, that based on our own experience. And I think that's probably as a parent, the hardest thing that I had to realize is that my comparative life experience and their comparative life experience is a completely different frame of reference. So like the things that happened every day for them would have been considered like the super treat for me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So having them appreciate, I don't know if that's going to happen. Like, you know, they'll say the words if we train them to say the words.
Right.
But honestly, you know, I think the true appreciation comes later. I think it comes when they have to write the check themselves, or when they're doing stuff with their own kids and those types of things. I'd like to say I had some magic answer on that,
Yeah.
but I mean, we don't do big splurgy things. So I guess we do. You know, again, it comes back to your frame of reference. So like, you know, they went to when I was a senior, there was a senior trip to go to Disneyland that was $50 and we couldn't afford to go. Right. My kids graduate and we go to Europe for 3 weeks for their graduation trip. Right. So, you know,
yeah,
there's
big
a massive
but
difference.
it's hard, you know, it's hard to expect kids to have the same level of gratitude and appreciation that you would growing up poor and not having access to those things.
Correct. So how, you know, what I've tried to do is just I think where my kids get the most gratitude is in giving to those who can't. I don't think it's necessarily a gratitude for what we've provided. I think they do have gratitude for what we've provided on some level, but I don't think they recognize it until they see what could have been. And oftentimes that comes from going out and serving in the community. Go serve in a soup kitchen. Go work there for 4 hours and actually see people who are really struggling. You know, there was a time when my oldest was about 13 when I realized that I probably had been making a mistake as a parent, or I didn't emphasize this enough. And we were in the drive-through at a McDonald's or a Burger King or something. And I placed my order, and the woman behind the thing didn't hear me correctly. So she asked again. So I, you know, explained the order again. And my son, well, my dog, my son made some snarky comment. And was like, you know, listen, if she were smart enough or something enough or whatever, she wouldn't be doing this job. And I was like, oh my God. I said, son, I worked at McDonald's when I was an adult. I worked part-time at McDonald's at night when I was in the Navy. So we need to have a conversation about this. You don't know what life is like. You don't know. But what I can guarantee, I was really upset with him at the time, and it wasn't fair to him to be as upset about it, but it triggered me. And I was like, listen, you live a life that is absolutely amazing compared to what most people in the world live their lives as. And here's the difference between what she's doing and what a lot of people are doing. She's working.
Yeah.
She is putting her time and her effort into making a difference to support herself, her family, despite whatever it's done. And what I love most about it is she doesn't have an ego about it. She's not above working at McDonald's, and neither am I.
Yeah.
I'd go work there tomorrow if it was the difference between feeding you and not feeding you. So that, you know, and I think that my reaction to that for him was an eye opener for him that he didn't see coming, and I didn't see coming. Right. You know, every once in a while you find those little things that just kind of, you go, holy crap.
It confronts your own values, right? You know, your kid makes a comment like that and you're like, hold on, I do not want you thinking that, saying that at all, you know, and sometimes you don't know until it comes out.
Yeah. So ironically, he today is probably one of the most giving, caring, goes the extra mile for people. So the lesson landed.
Yeah. Great.
You know,
mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Before we wrap things up, any final thoughts on this idea of ending generational poverty? Anything else we haven't touched on?
Well, so my mission now is really to try and help others do that for themselves. I think it's a unique person that says in a family that it's not going to go past me. I am the end of that. And I want to find those people, and I want to encourage them, and I want to teach them, and I want to give them opportunity. I want to do whatever I can because if I can end it with that one person and everybody that happens behind them, then I think we can really make an impact on the world,
for sure.
frankly. So,
Chuck, my final question. I'm a big fan of gratitude, especially expressing gratitude to those who've helped you along the way. Who are some people, especially peers and contemporaries, maybe someone in the world of EO or entrepreneurship who you'd want to just call out and thank them specifically?
well, so there are a lot of people who've done lots of impact for me, but I'm going to talk about one who is not an EO, who's not a particularly wealthy person where it comes to money or business, but he changed my life more than almost anybody else did. And this is when I was in my 20s, when I was a broker, actually, at the time. And his name is Adriel Boyland. He and I used to go clubbing together, right? We'd go out and chase girls, and we'd walk into these bars, and literally everybody in the bar would just swarm him. Like, now Adriel's a good looking guy, but he's like 5'7", he's not a big muscular guy. He's just a guy. Everybody loves Adriel. Everybody loved him. And I would be standing next to him, literally in a $1,000 Armani suit, and nobody would even say hello. Right. And I was just like trying to unpack that. And so one night we used to go play backgammon at his apartment at the end of after the bars closed, and just talk about life. And Adriel's about 9 years older than I am. And I asked him, I said, dude, what is going on, man? Everybody loves you. And man, nobody even notices I'm there. Right. And he goes, well, Chuck, you're guy. He goes, well, Chuck, you're kind of you kind of put people off. You act like you're better than they are. And I was like, what? He goes, well, you don't, but that's the perception that people have. And I said, well, tell me more. He says, well, you don't really say hi. You stand there, you kind of watch people, you don't engage people, you don't smile. You're just there, and people kind of perceive you as thinking that you're better than they are. They perceive you as being something. And I was stunned by this. I was like, what? I'm like, really? I was just shy. Like, I was afraid to actually say hi, or afraid of being kind of rejected by peers, or, those types of things. And so I went out the next day, and I went to the library, and I checked out How to Win Friends and Influence People. Right.
Dale Carnegie. Yeah. Classic.
Dale Carnegie. Yeah. And I A/B tested every chapter of that book. And then I started copying Adriel. Now, Adriel's one of these human beings that every time you interact with him, you feel better about who you are for having had the interaction. And for 30 seconds, you are the only person in his world. And you know that. And just watching that, and watching how that worked for him, and learning that skill, and learning how to just be focused on other people and be curious about other people instead of being afraid of other people. Single biggest influence. It changed everything about my life. Everything. Literally everything. Because I was still that shy, poor kid with a chip on his shoulder, trying to prove something wrong, prove the world wrong, and all that other stuff at the time. So, I mean, he's probably was like this major pivot point for me. I have a couple former EO forum mates that are in my will today, because when my kids were younger, I was still traveling a lot, and if I died, there was no plan. They both stepped forward and said, listen, if something happens to you, we'll run your company, we'll hire a president, we'll make sure your family's taken care of. So I think I'm just blessed. Honestly, I'm blessed. Warren Rustand. I mean, I was texting with him today. He has had a massive influence on my life. When
I interviewed him, I told him I'd interviewed probably 24 people who'd said that on their interview. Yeah.
George Gann is another one who's had a massive influence on my life. And I was texting with him this morning. I think EO gives us such a target-rich environment of amazing, high caliber, great character individuals to learn from. And Warren Rustand for me is like in philosophy, there's this idea of a ruler, right? A straight edge by which you compare yourself. That type of ruler, not a ruler in terms of, oh my gosh, you're in charge, right? And George is that way. Dean Dorcas is that way. He's one of the guys in the will. Warren Rustan's that way. But they're a ruler by which I compare my behavior, the way I treat people, the way I want to show up in the world, my character, and try to keep aligned with them. And I think religion. I think depending on your faith, Christ serves that purpose for Christians as well. So I mean. And has always served that purpose for me as well. So, I mean, hopefully that answers that question.
No, it was great. It was a great answer. Chuck, where can people go to connect with you, learn more about you, and follow up if they have any questions?
LinkedIn's probably the best way. You can just search me on LinkedIn. You could go to either one of my company's websites, attentus.tech or skynetbb.com. But really, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'd love to connect with you. And if there's ever anything I could do to support anybody, please feel free to reach out. I love helping people.
Chuck, thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.